Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear participants. I welcome you to today's session of the Islam Study Circle. As you can see, we're going to study some of the Quranic verses and the hadith of the Prophet, and of course, a Bible verse of the day in our first segment. I will begin the first segment by reciting out the Quranic verse which is being displayed before you and its translation as well. So, the words are وَمِن كُلِّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَا زَوْجَيْنِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. A translation of this Surah Zariyat verse, to be precise, the verse 49 of Surah Zariyat, it reads as, "And we have made everything in pairs so that you may be reminded of the hereafter." So, as you can see, one of the fundamental precepts of the Quran and one of the fundamental tenets of Islamic belief is belief in the hereafter. And the Quran has actually substantiated the hereafter through a number of ways and a number of arguments. And the one that you're reading just now is another of its arguments that the Quran generally presents in favor of the Day of Judgment. And it says that it has created everything in pairs. So we, of course, can see that the biggest and the most prominent of these pairs is man and woman. So we know that they complement one another, they fulfill certain voids of each other, they supplement one another, and in the presence of one, the absence of the other is always felt. And once the two come together in a union, in a family, we find that there is something complete about them. However, when one of them is there and they're not together, we find that there's something missing. So this is a very, very prominent pair. Another very prominent pair which the Quran often alludes to is the sky and the earth, the heavens and the earth. And it says how heavens and the earth complement one another, and how the rain which falls from the heavens becomes a source of life and vegetation by sprinkling on the earth and then causing vegetation to sprout. Now, a similar case is with this world as well. Now, this world in itself should seem to be a big void unless there is something which we can call it to be its pair. We find that there is a lot of injustice in this world. We find that people get punished without any reason. We find that people who are very pious and very virtuous, we find them to be at the bottom of the society. So if there is a God and there is something which is called justice or fairness, then this is seriously missing in this world. And this is just one aspect that I have just alluded to. Otherwise, there are so many things in which this world seems to be an incomplete creation unless it is complemented. So the purpose of this verse is that it makes us remind of the fact that this earth or this earthly life is a pair of something which we are missing here, and without which this earthly life is incomplete. And the purpose of this verse is to make us realize that in the absence of the hereafter, this world is a meaningless creation. It is a purposeless creation. It cannot be explained. And hence, the purpose is to tell us that as far as this paired creation is concerned, we can clearly see that this world and the next world, they form a pair with one another. When they are viewed together with one another, we find them to be very, very meaningful. However, in the absence of any one of them, we find that they are a meaningless creation. So the purpose of the Quran, as we often come across the case, is that it tends to remind us of great realities through a very simple reasoning, through very, very cogent, through very, very simple and to the point reasoning. And it is here that we find the Quran in its brevity and its conciseness and its terseness to be a literary masterpiece, and to be something which is so close to our hearts, and to be something that we find as if its reasoning is so relishing to us. We cherish it so much as if it is our own reasoning, as if it's something which has been brought before us through our own inner experience. So the Quran is very certain here when it says that this world has been created. However, if you want to find out that why this world has been created as a member of a pair, then you need to understand that there is another member of this pair. This world has to be complemented by the hereafter, and when the two are viewed together, only then do they become a meaningful, complete whole. And in the absence of the hereafter, this particular world becomes a meaningless creation. So, as the verse is very clear, it says that وَمِن كُلِّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَا زَوْجَيْنِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, that we have made everything in pairs so that you reflect that this world has a pair, just as a man and a woman are a pair, the heavens and the earth are a pair, the moon and the sun are another pair. Similarly, this world and the other world also forms a pair. And if we are not being able to witness the coming world before our eyes, then it can be educed, it can be deduced, it can be substantiated by the fact that if the one of the pair exists, then there has to be the other pair as well. The only thing is that at the moment we might not be witnessing it, we might not be seeing it, but just as a woman and a man, when they come together, and in the absence of one of them, we can clearly see that there is some other member of the pair which is missing. In a similar way, the Quran says that if you just reflect that since everything has been made in pairs, then this world must have a pair as well. And the pair of this world actually is the next world. And the two, when they come together, when they are viewed together, only then do we find them to be a very, very meaningful creation from the Almighty. So as I said, that the reasoning of the Quran is very simple, it's very to the point, it's straight. It is as if it comes out from the heart and goes into the heart. Now let's move on to the next part of our session, of this first session, and this is the hadith of the day. And this hadith which is being displayed before you is from the Sahih of Imam Muslim. Let me just read out the words of the hadith and their translation. So it says, حدثني أبو برزة قال قلت يا نبي الله علمني شيئا أنتفع به قال اعزل الأذى عن طريق المسلمين. So this means that Abu Barza reported, I said, O Prophet of God, teach me something which is beneficial to me. He said, he of course here refers to the Prophet. The Prophet replied, remove things from the paths of the Muslims which are a source of bother for them. So again, you see, it's something which we often find the Prophet, the person of the Prophet, if we've come used to him, the way he speaks to us, the way he advises us, the way he counsels us, that he actually has this habit of telling us that as far as we can, we should try to do these small acts of kindness. And one of them is, it's ridiculously simple. It's so simple that one would do it automatically without realizing. But again, the fact is, a person as the Prophet, as the personality of the Prophet is, he tends to remind us of these small acts of kindness as well. He tells us that even if you remove small hindrances, small pieces of stone maybe, or pieces of paper, or any filth which might be lying on the way and causing bother or harm to people, then this is an act of virtue. So actually someone which it is said Abu Barza said when he asked the Prophet that teach me something which is beneficial to me. Of course he meant that teach me something which is beneficial to me vis-a-vis the hereafter, vis-a-vis the fact that it would benefit from me for the hereafter. So the Prophet replied, even if you do as small a thing as remove any means, any pieces of bother from the way of a Muslims, or from the path of a Muslims, it would be counted as an act of kindness. And let us, as I always try to point this out, that these small acts of kindness, they should come naturally to us. They are basically human related and they don't need any external advice or an external counseling. But the fact is that the Prophet did remind one of his companions that these small acts of kindness do count towards your own register of accounts and on your own register of good deeds. So look out for things that might be a cause of bother for people. Look out for things which might be a cause of harm for people. And this actually tells us something about how the Prophet wants us to behave. It tells us that we have to think of others as well. It tells us that we must not be selfish. We have to look for the benefit of other people. It's not just our own benefit that we need to think of. Of course, that is a given, that's an understood thing. And it also comes naturally to us because we are often very, very careful or very observant of the fact that we must not incur any loss or any problem should come upon us. So we are very careful in that. The Prophet here is actually advising us that it's not only your own self that you should think of, but also think of others. Also think of bringing convenience to others, bringing comfort to others, thinking of others. And when a person starts thinking of others and he starts doing things for others, as small a thing as removing a piece of stone or a rock or something which is causing a problem in any pathway, then actually this is a means of education and instruction to him. A person who will do these small acts of kindness will always be very, very careful and very, very sensitive and sympathetic in bigger acts of kindness as well. How can we imagine a person who is going to remove things which are causing hindrance to Muslims in their pathways or to people in their pathways? He would not think of other bigger hindrances. So if we are careful in a very small, in a very, very limited aspect, we are bound to be very sympathetic, very careful in larger aspects of life. So this is how prophets of God teach us. They tell us that if you do small acts of kindness, big acts of kindness, greater acts of kindness, large acts of kindness will become easier for you. And this is something that I think we should learn from the personalities of the prophets of God. And in particular, we should make it a point that as far as we can, we should reach out for others. We should reach out for their help. We should reach out how we can do best for them, what we can do best for them. And as far as we can, we should try to make life comfortable, life more easy for people around us. So now let's move on to the next part of this session, and this is a Bible verse of the day, and it relates incidentally to the topic that we are discussing as well. And it's a very famous verse of the Bible, and this time it's found in other places of the Bible as well, but here you can see I've cited from Leviticus, the book of Leviticus, which is a book of the Old Testament, and the chapter number 19 and verse is 18. So the verse reads, "Do not make attempts to get equal with one who has done you wrong, or keep hard feelings against the children of your people, but have love for your neighbor as for your own self." So what the prophet wants, or what Prophet Jesus has, Prophet Moses in fact, I beg your pardon, we're reading the Old Testament, so it has to be the Prophet Moses speaking to us here, and he is actually advising us that we must not be people who are careless regarding the rights of people who are very close to us, and there is no one as close in proximity as a neighbor who's our right next door acquaintance, who's fine right next door to us. And the verse actually starts off by saying that do not make attempts to get equal with one who has done you wrong or keep hard feelings. So in effect it's telling us that requite evil by good behavior. If you are doing something in which you find that the other person is inflicting harm on you, or the other person is not actually being a person who should be caring and sympathetic to your own self, then don't make it a means of scoring points or keeping hard feelings against him, but try as much as you can to forgive that person. And instead of seeking revenge or paying in the same coin, you should have this magnanimity in your own self and forgive other people. And in fact, what the verse goes on to say is that love your neighbor as your own self. And this again has become a cliche, a proverb in the English language, and we all know that when the Bible says love thy neighbor as thyself, it actually tells us that we have to be people who must have concern for other people. And in particular, the person who is living right next door has the greatest right on us. We must think of the person who is living close to us, and we know that today the society in which we are living in, it generally does not have this concern for the next door neighbor, simply because we have become too busy in our routines. We have become too involved in our own life cycles that at times we don't even know who the person is who's living next door. But we must find out. We must take time and find out people who live close to us, because they have a right on us, and we never know they might be in a spot of bother. So it's not just like providing them with food or with other things or basic needs of life. At times, your neighbor needs your emotional support. At times, your neighbor needs someone to fall back to. At times, it is your own personality who might give him or her shelter vis-a-vis emotional breakdown. So it says that you have to love your neighbor. You have to find ways and means of helping your neighbor, of thinking of him or her, and finding out if there is anything that you can do to help her. So don't forget that it's not always a situation of giving donations or financial contribution to your neighbors, because your neighbors might not be needing these financial contributions. Some of them might be, but mostly if you're living in posh neighborhoods, they might not be needing these financial support from you. But what they may be needing is emotional support. What they may be needing is this bond of humanity which brings us together, this bond of humanity in which we share our sorrows, in which we share our happiness, in which we bring together the bond of humanity so that our children, so that our next in kin can strengthen this bond, can come close to one another as human beings, learn from one another. And as we all feel that without one another we are very weak people, all of us have been created in a way that we feel as if we had this strength in us, that we had people to fall back upon, we had people on which we could rely upon, our efforts, our energies, they increase manifold. So it's like saying that when we get together, it's like this community living, it's like this bond of fraternity, this bond of humanity, which makes us come together, which makes us feel as if we are one, as if we are not strangers to one another, but we are people who can clearly and very specially make the day of the other person by listening to his problems, by providing a shoulder to his problems, by wiping out the tears of people who might live close to us, the old people, the sick people, people who are living in the handicap. So there are so many things around us in this regard that we need to understand. And hence I would say that this is a very comprehensive biblical verse from the book of Leviticus, and I don't think that we need to think much more about this than the fact that if today we are not acquainted with our neighbors, with our immediate neighborhood, let's make it a point to make friends with them, to find out who they are, and also think about what they might require from us. And as I said, it's not just funds or monetary donations that people might need. It's much more than that. At times, you need this support in which a person might have fallen sick in your neighborhood, who might be requiring some care, and you could provide it. It might be that your own contacts could help a person in bother, and there are so many problems that we are facing today. And I would stress this once again, that the biggest support that today we can give to our neighbors and to people to whom we are acquainted is this emotional support, in which we are able to bring them this comfort and this soothness, in which they are able to lead a life which is much more comfortable, and in which they can realize the fact that at least they have some person on which they can rely and fall back upon. So this brings us to the end of the first session, my dear participants, and if you have any questions regarding this first part, we can discuss them now, and then inshallah we'll move on to the next part, or the next segment.
Please click on the hand icon next to your name if you have a question before we move to the next segment. Doctor, we don't have any questions. We can proceed.
Okay. So the misconception that I'm going to discuss today actually sprang from the discussion that we were having in the previous session, and this actually relates to divorce and various misconceptions which are found regarding divorce, and which actually have become so numerous in our society that we find families breaking up, we find families just for the sake of not knowing what the correct procedure of divorce is, they fall apart by using these wrong tactics. And even more, I would say, alarming is the fact, is the way how scholars start to deal with these divorce cases, especially when they have to deal with those divorces which are not given according to the proper procedure, and hence it causes a lot of emotional trauma to the family, which is broken up as a result. Now, if you study the Quran, you'll find out that the basic thing which the Quran tries to communicate to us is that living as a husband and a wife is a very natural state. Living as a husband and a wife is a state which is in which the Quran actually wants the spouses to provide comfort to one another. So the words of the Quran are لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. The marriage has been actually stipulated by the Almighty so that both the spouses can find comfort, and they live in an atmosphere of peace and serenity. But however, if this is not the case, and in spite of a lot of trials, it has become impossible for a spouse or the spouses to live together. So it's not that they have been eternally bound with one another, and there is always this chance that they can separate from one another. And as far as the basis of this separation is concerned, it could be anything. It could be as small as the fact that you would not like to live with a spouse in spite of you trying your best because of some habit of his or her. And it could be as grave as a thing as adultery or unfaithfulness of a spouse. So it could be a very small thing, and it could be a very large thing. But it is the ultimate decision has to be made by either of the spouses, and of course it has to be made in the interest of the children if the family has been raised. But the Quran tells us that before this divorce proceeds, or something that we call divorce happens, the first thing that needs to be conducted or that needs to be ensured is that if there is this problem that the husband and a wife find it very difficult to pull along, and it looks incumbent that if more time will be spent on argument, and hence creating a lot of discomfort and displeasure in the family, not only for themselves but for the children as well, and it seems very imminent that the best way out and the best option is to separate. And the Quran first of all tells us that the thing that I'm just going to point out, and I'd also like to point this out, that this is the thing that we often miss. People who indulge in divorces or who give these divorces, they forget that the Quranic guideline regarding divorce is that before you reach this extreme scenario that you would like to divorce your wife, or the wife would like to seek a divorce from the husband, it says that you must appoint an arbitrator, one from the husband's family and one from the wife's family. So it says hakamam min ahlihi wa hakamam min ahliha. So the arbitrators should try to sit down and reconcile the two as far as possible. Divorce must not be resorted to before the step has been undertaken. If people think that divorce is the only option, they are not being able to resolve their differences among themselves amicably, then they must involve an elder of the family, an elder, one from the husband's family and the other from the wife's family. And then these two arbitrators should sit together and try their best as far as possible to find out and analyze what's causing the rift, what's causing the problem, and why is it that the husband and wife, or either of them, would not like to pull along and live together. And then they should try their best to make this reconciliation happen. And only if they fail should then either of the spouses proceed for divorce. So you see, the first step which the Quran has put into this whole procedure is that it wants people to calm down. They must not resort to divorce unless they have involved someone from either of the family, who have sitten together, who have tried to talk them into a reconciliation. And when this happens, the Quran wants to ensure that the tempers are not running high. It wants to ensure that the divorce does not take place in a state of frenzy. It does not take place in rashness. So it wants the two arbitrators to sit together, analyze the situation, advise the spouses, and tell them what they are missing, and tell them how manners can be improved. And today, in modern day societies, we have marriage counselors who actually also have a very similar task. So just as arbitrators of the family, before this situation is reached, even more advisable is that before you involve your family members, maybe you can go to a counselor, a marriage counselor, who can sort out things that you were not being able to sort out among yourselves, and this does help. However, if this does not help, then of course they must resort to this arbitratorship between two elders of the family, one from the husband's side and one from the wife's side. Now, if this also fails, then the Quran says that a husband and a wife have an equal right to divorce. So a husband can divorce his wife, and a wife can seek divorce from the husband, and if she seeks an upright nature, he should actually comply with the wife's demand and give this divorce. So the only difference between is that both have an equal right to divorce. The only thing is that there is a procedural difference. As far as husbands are concerned, they can give a divorce, and as far as a wife is concerned, she can seek divorces, after which a husband should, an upright husband should actually comply. And if there is a problem, he does not comply, then of course a wife or a lady can seek or knock the doors of a court of law. Now, the other thing that needs to be understood is that as far as divorce is concerned, the first thing is that it has to be given in a very, very calculated way, in a way in which no person should be in a bout of frenzy. It should be a very calculated and a very well thought of decision. And the words of the Quran are وَإِنْ عَزَمُوا الطَّلَاقِ, which means when you have decided, you have made a firm intention of giving divorce, then only should you proceed. So this in one word actually gives gives us a signal that all divorces which are given in a state of frenzy, in a state of anger, in a state of hate, in a state of emotionally charged atmosphere, they are not valid, because in those circumstances usually a person is not his own self, and hence he loses his calm, and it's just about a 15 or 20-minute period after which he realizes that he had done the wrong thing. So the first thing which the Quran says, that the divorce has to be given in a way in which the person who is giving divorce has full cognizance, he's in full consciousness, he's not in a state of emotional frenzy, he's not in a state of anger, he is in a state of calm and cool a way in which he knows what he's doing. So the other thing is that once you make up this mind that you are going to give divorce to your wife, the Quran says that you have to say the divorce sentence just once. It's not that you have to do it twice or thrice or 10 times or 100 times as people often think. And most people have this confusion that unless they say the divorce sentence thrice, it shall not happen. Well, this is not how the Quran tells us. The Quran says that you have to divorce your wife, and when you do so, then you just say this divorce sentence or this divorce utterance once only, and then let the iddat period pass. Iddat, or the waiting period, is the period which is given so that if the wife is pregnant or there is a chance of pregnancy, then this should become known in this period. Also, it has been advised that the time of this divorce should be such that it should not be given in the period, in the time in which a wife is passing through a menstrual cycle. In fact, it should be her period of cleanliness in which the husband and wife have not met each other intimately. So in only those periods of cleanliness should divorce be pronounced. It should be pronounced just once, and that's it. After the iddat period, which is usually 3 menstrual cycles, once this is complete, then the wife stands separated. Divorce is done, and a person has used up his chance of divorcing his wife once. And if there is going to be a remarriage, it can take place after this one divorce sentence. And if within the iddat period the husband decides to revoke his divorce, he calls in 2 witnesses, and in their presence he takes back the divorce, and the fact is that he and his wife continue to be husband and wife the way they are. So this is like availing one chance of divorce. The Quran says that you can avail this chance a second time as well. If there is some problem which has arisen a second time in your life, you can again divorce your wife and take her back in her iddat period. And if that happens, then of course in the presence of witnesses, all that is required is that you have decided to revoke this divorce. Now, this is the second chance that he has availed. However, if the third time this also happens and the third time he uses it, then the Quran says that the two cannot come together, they cannot stay in their union unless there is a whole procedure which I'm not going to discuss at the moment, which is, of course, is another scenario in which the husband who has divorced his wife, then there has to be a whole procedure which has to be followed. For example, there has to be another marriage which is going to take place in which the wife has to marry some other person. If she marries another person, and then out of naturally arisen circumstances, that person also divorces the wife, and then only she becomes permissible for the first husband. Again, as I said, that's a scenario which is a specific scenario, and for the moment what you need to understand is that divorce happens by just pronouncing the divorce utterance once only. And once you do that, and if you take it back in the iddat period, you have used your one chance, you can use your second chance as well, but after the third chance, as I said, has to be this procedure which has to be followed. But if you decide to divorce her, then after one divorce utterance, after the iddat finishes, she is now free. She can marry someone else, and the husband of course can marry someone else, and they can marry each other again as well. And therefore, the Quran says that as far as divorce utterances are concerned, they must be cogently, they must be consciously uttered once only. So the violations which take place regarding divorce are number one, are that people don't realize that they must not divorce their wives when they are passing through their menstrual cycles. They have to be, or in that period of cleanliness when intercourse has not taken place. So the first thing that has to be understood is that the husband has to pronounce divorce when the wife is not passing through a menstrual cycle, and also she is in a period of cleanliness, that period of cleanliness or purity in which the two have not intimately met each other. That's number one. And the second thing is that it should not be in a state of frenzy that he gives this divorce. It has to be a very well calculated move, and the third thing is that this divorce sentence has to be uttered just once, and that's it. Divorce gets complete after that once the iddat period expires. So this is a very, very ridiculously simple procedure which has been unfortunately made a whole mess and a whole hash of it, because people either think that as far as divorce is concerned, unless 3 divorces are given, and that too in one go, it does not happen. So this is not the case. And the other thing that is very important is that the mistake which is generally made by, I would humbly say, the mistake which is generally made by our scholars by most scholars is that when people give divorce in frenzy or in anger, instead of realizing that the Quran has actually given us this very strong verdict that it has to be intention that needs to be checked. It has to be your own decision that must be there. What our scholars do is that in the presence of a certain weak hadith, not only is it weak, but it has a very specific context. They say that if a person gives divorce, if he is in a state of frenzy, if he is in a state of anger, then that divorce shall happen. It shall be counted as valid. And also if that divorce is given such that 3 divorces are given in one go, then we know that there is a very major group of our Muslim scholars who actually regard these to be valid. So all these cases are actually violation of the divorce procedure, and hence they must be very, very carefully be avoided. And this can only be done if the husband and wife, they are properly educated. And I always say that just as marriage needs education, the norms of marriage, the way people get married, the way they need education regarding how they should behave as spouses, how they should behave as couples, similarly, an equal education is needed regarding the procedure of divorce, regarding how this unpleasant, although it's an unpleasant thing of course, but then it has to take place in a proper procedure. So they should get educated that this has a certain procedure which must be followed, and as per this procedure, before divorce takes place, they must involve the elders of the family who can reconcile, and if this is not possible, then one divorce has to be given. It should not be given in a state of emotional frenzy. It has to be given in a very calculated and a calm way. Again, It has to be given when nothing else is, there's no option which is left. And then again, in this regard, they must also realize that this is an option that they are using, and once they have given this divorce, the husband has the right to take back his wife within the iddat period. However, when the iddat period crosses, then that divorce will be final. However, there still be a chance for them to marry again. This after the first divorce, they'll still have another chance if the second divorce happens. But after the third divorce, they'll not be having this chance. So, in a nutshell, if this procedure is followed in letter and in spirit, a lot of bother through which we go today in our families, in which wrongly given divorces, either in emotional frenzy or because they think that unless they give 3 divorces, they will not happen. This will be circumvented and given a proper way to be solved. So this I've just explained a few areas in which divorce has become a big bother, a source of bother. There are several other areas as well which I have not discussed, because my concern here were the common misconceptions which surround this concept of divorce. The way the Quran has described it is very simple. It's something that we need to understand. However, instead of following the simple procedure of the Quran, we often end up in a lot of bother, and this is further complicated by many of our scholars who, by not realizing the fact that divorces which are given in anger and divorces which are given in a state of emotional frenzy and in a charged atmosphere, they never happen, because it's like the Prophet we have the example of the Prophet also, that he would always ask for the intention of a person, whether he really intended to give the divorce to a person or not. It's at times you have this anger in you, you can express this anger as well, but the real thing is that in anger we usually don't have the intention. But the bottom line is that if there is intention present, then even that anger is at times acceptable. But that anger in which you have no intention of actually divorcing your wife is the one that we are talking about here. So it has to be the question in which the intention of the person has to be taken into account. The intention of the husband has to be taken into account, even if he has uttered something in a state of frenzy. Our scholars are well advised, if they think and they look up the sources once again and see that the Quran says in azamut talaq, that talaq has to be given in a state of determination, in which a person knows what she's doing, in which he knows what the decision is. It should not be given, if it is given in a state of frenzy, then it's actually like violating what the Quran has said. And in this violation of law should not be taken as an implementation of the law. On the other hand, of course, you can penalize the person who has done this wrong, but it is a very, very wrong notion that such divorces should be made to happen, because, as I said, in the first place, the Quran has made it very clear. In the second place, the hadith on the basis of which many of our scholars think that divorces given in anger happen, it in itself is a weak and a zaif hadith, and also it relates to a very particular context in which a person was actually playing about and he was giving divorce to his wife, and then when he would be checked, he would say that I'm just giving it out of fun or out of anger. And at this, it is said that the Prophet said, if you do it now, then it will be implemented, because we're not going to give you any concession for your frenzy or for your anger, because you're now making a joke out of it. This is what the actual narrative is, but in itself, the way it has been reported is also not technically sahih, and hence again, that narrative cannot be relied upon. So I'll bring this discussion regarding divorce to a closure here, so that if you have any questions regarding this very sensitive issue, we can now take them up.
Explaining about the divorce. My question is, can one get the right of divorce written in the Nikah-nama? And can a woman do that? And secondly, that when a husband wants to marry his wife again after one iddat period, do they have to go through a nikah?
So the answer to your second question is yes, they have to go through this nikah once again, because once the iddat passes, now they are free individuals. They are individuals who have no longer related to one another. So therefore, in this situation, once the iddat passes, if they have to come together, they have to do the nikah again. And as far as your first question is concerned, I'm sorry, what was the first question?
Was that in the nikah nama?
Right, right of divorce. Yes, the right of divorce. So the right of divorce, if you right. So you see, our nikah namas, or the marriage contracts which are printed in most Eastern countries like Pakistan or India and some others, this right of divorce is given to the wife, in which she has actually an equal right to divorce. I would say this is something which is not in conformity with the precepts of the Quran, because the Quran says, "Biyadihi uqtatun nikah." It tells us that it's the head of the family which has the right to divorce. However, a better procedure in this regard is that a wife should have this option, that if she demands divorce from the husband, then the husband should be given a certain time, maybe let's say 100 days or 90 days or 60 days, in which either he tries to appease the wife, tries to reconcile with the wife. Otherwise, after the passage of that particular period of time, he will be bound to give a divorce to the wife. So this would be a more closely followed procedure as far as the Quran is concerned, because the Quran says that it has to be the head of the family which gives divorce. And as you know, that in case of a family setup, it is the husband who is the head of the family. So instead of seeking the right for divorce, a better way out is that once a wife demands divorce from her husband, he, after passing through that period in which he will try to reconcile or try to stop this divorce from taking place, he'll try his best. But once a particular period passes, he will be bound to give divorce to the wife. And I would say that this is a much more valid procedure, because in this case, the right of divorce still remains. The procedure of divorce in which the divorce is given, it still remains with the husband, whereas in the other case it goes to the wife.
Nikah, that if he
refuses, absolutely,
divorce will go. Okay.
Absolutely. Okay. I think this is what we should incorporate in the nikah nama, that if the wife demands divorce, then the husband shall be bound to give divorce within a certain stipulated period of time.
If you don't mind, regarding the lecture last week, there's some very important questions I'd like to ask you about the gay community. Dr. Shehzad, the gay community exists in Pakistan too. I know of several people who are gay, and we are in denial and brush it under the carpet.
Right.
We have a family member who's gay. She is a very pious woman, prays 5 times, has done Umrah, Hajj, and I can vouch for her piety. When I found out she was gay, I was very, very sad. I want to understand, can you explain this? Could it be genetic? Could it be a medical problem? We give our children the right values, but in spite of this, if something like this happens, should we condemn them, punish them, or let Allah just judge them? Because I'm personally going through it right now. We just discovered this. So I'd like your guidance on this, please.
Well, first of all, as I explained last time, that basically it's a sexual deviation. To be a lesbian, to be a gay, or to belong to the LGBT community is something that we consider to be a deviation from the norm. And I don't think I would not go along with this deduction that it is genetically inspired, or it has a genetic origin. I think it's basically a case in which you need rehabilitation. It's like having a disorder, like any other disorder, and it needs to be treated. And the way that you treat such people is the way you treat any patient of any ailment. And I think that in such cases, instead of punishing such people or ostracizing them or cutting relations off with them, this is absolutely uncalled for. You should become even more sympathetic, even more caring, even more loving if you find out someone who is going through this disorder and deviation. And instead of discussing this disorder and deviation, because of course when a person is indulging in this, he or she knows that whatever she's doing is what she thinks is right or wrong. So the first thing is that you need to show sympathy to a person, to be close to him or her, and if, as you've said, that she's a very upright lady, she's a very pious lady, she prays and she fasts and she does umrahs, etc. So I personally have come across so many gays who have a similar inclination, who might have this distortion or this deviation, but at the same time they are very, very pious individuals. So I would say that instead of discussing their sexuality or their disorientation, we should actually treat them as if there is any other person, and if that person thinks that this is a disorder, then we should help him or her out by rehabilitation, and there are such rehabilitatory measures, but this can only happen if the other person thinks that this is a disorder. In the absence of this thinking, all you can do is you can actually make the other person feel as if you are his or her well-wisher. Do not discard that person and let the Almighty decide his or her fate. And of course, if a discussion comes up, you can express your point of view in a very polite way and not a very dogmatic way, and let the other person also contemplate. And remember, we are not people who have been sent here to send people to hell or to tell them that they're going to hell, because we are no one to judge the fate of people. Let the Almighty judge the fate of people. As far as we are concerned, we have to be amicable, we have to be friendly, we have to be people who uphold these values ourselves. We set examples of good deeds, of upright behavior ourselves, and if there's a person who has this deviant behavior in a particular sphere of his personality, of her personality, always think that we in our own personalities also have these deviant behaviors. And so it's all the more reason that we concentrate on our own selves. And as I said, if such a person realizes this, because I know people who pass through this situation and they have this guilt in them. It's not always that they find themselves, they don't justify themselves always. There are people who find this as a guilt in them, and it is such people to whom we can actually make a very big difference in their lives by helping them out, by rehabilitating them. There are so many rehabilitation clinics around and doctors around who can help us out psychologically and emotionally. But as I said, this is only for those people who think that this is a disorder. As far as people are concerned who think that it's not a disorder, but it's like a genetically produced individual, we cannot argue with them, because they're not going to accept your own point of view. All that you can do is that if there ever is a discussion, you can present your own point of view, but without being dogmatic, without being judgmental, and without actually pronouncing what's going to happen in the hereafter, because that's none of our business.
Dr. Shehzad, as far as this relative is concerned, let me point out to you that I talked to her, and she is very happy, and she's now living with someone and with another woman. And as I said, I felt sad. I was just wondering whether she was born like this, or I don't know why I think it could be a medical problem which the doctors could help to discern therapy. But last week, the class that was you held, I got the impression from some other lady who talked about her children that, going to schools in America and sitting with somebody who may be gay might influence you. And I just don't feel that way. I just feel that this is something, it just happens to someone. Why? I have no explanation for it.
So I would say that even if you, let's for a moment suppose that it is genetically compelled. Let's for a moment suppose that, although I do not fully agree with this, but let's suppose that it could be genetically compelled, or people are genetically disordered in this way. Then again, if there is this thing which is called OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. For example, if a person is a kleptomaniac, he has a habit of stealing. So it could be something which is genetically compelled. But can we allow kleptomaniacs to go to the bazaar or to the markets, and if they start stealing, we can allow them to steal? Of course we don't, because we say that it's a disorder, and if a person has this disorder of kleptomania, of course he might not be punished the way other people are, because this is like an obsession with him, but it will be regarded as as a deviation. Similarly, there are serial killers, people who are serial killers, and one can argue that a serial killer is a person who is genetically compelled because of certain circumstances. But again, let us suppose that serial killing is genetically compelled. What would you do? You'll of course confine that serial killer to some environment where he or she is not able to cause harm to the society. So the bottom line is that even if this is something which is genetically compelled, even then what at best it can happen is that there could be some excuse for that person, and the Almighty might be lenient in treating that person. But as far as the actual harm or actual process that he is undertaking is concerned, that has to be looked upon as a process in which you need to rehabilitate that person. You might need to isolate that person. But again, as I said, that can only happen in societies, in environments where this is thought to be a deviation. Living in the United States or Australia or United Kingdom, where this is no longer considered as a deviation. 100 years ago or 70 years ago in the US also, this was a big shameful thing. But today, as the things have progressed, it's now become a norm. So it's not going to happen the way I'm speaking in countries where we have this phenomena in which the LGBT community is actually a recognized community, it's an acceptable community. And in the last lecture, I was speaking regarding this community as a whole, where it exists in societies and it is a legitimate existence. So my whole stress was in my last talk was regarding a legitimate existence of this community. However, if there are areas in which we can find these people, and we find also that they feel this guilt in them and they feel that they would like to set right themselves. Because I know certain people of this community who actually think that they are doing something wrong and they'd like to correct themselves, but they are too compelled to do that thing that they cannot find any way out. So that's another treatment that you need to understand. So fundamentally, you need to understand that there are people who think that this is a completely okay orientation, it's completely acceptable. So that's one category of people. Then there is another category of people who think that this is a wrong orientation, but they actually cannot stop themselves. And then there's a third category of people who are neither of the two, and instead of showing their sympathy or maybe a right attitude, they start to shun these people, they start to hate these people, they start to pronounce verdicts regarding the fate of these people. So I think all these categories need to be separated, and each has to be dealt with in a separate way and in a separate manner.
Thank you, Dr. I'm very sorry. My apologies. There's 4 more people in line.
Sorry.
Yes. Allow me, with your permission, if I can take them.
Sure. Sorry.
Yeah,
Thank
sorry.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Dr. Shehzad, there's 2 written questions. I'll take the first one. It's from Syed Mohsen. He is saying, does the same procedure apply, and in a parenthesis of arbiters and 2 chances and the iddat period if the wife is the one seeking divorce?
Yes, it does. Because if the wife is seeking divorce, again, as I said, that the procedure would be such that the husband should be told that he has to give this divorce, because the step in which this procedure has to take place is that she seeks divorce, she demands divorce, and since the husband is the person who is going to give divorce, the same procedure will be followed. So the difference is just one. In the case the husband is to give divorce, of course, he does not need to ask anyone except his own self. And if the wife needs to seek divorce, she'll also ask the husband to give her divorce. And since the husband is going to give divorce in both cases, the procedure is to be the same.
He's saying, why do our scholars then rely upon a Zaif hadith that outrightly contradicts the Quran? What's the iddat period, and remarry option is available, or they can get together by mutual understanding or in presence of witness? Kindly elaborate.
So as I said, this is something which our scholars need to revisit and re-evaluate, because first of all, as I said, it's against the Quran. And when you give divorce in a state of frenzy, because you see, let me also point out the fact that what the hadith says is that the divorce which is given in anger or in jest is valid. This is what the words of the hadith are. Of course, it has some other words as well, but the relevant part of the hadith is that all divorces which are given in jest and in anger, they are equally valid. So the first thing is that this hadith itself is against the Quran, because the Quran says that it has to be a calculated decision. As I have repeatedly pointed out, the verse of the Quran is in azamut talaq, when you decide to give divorce in a very calculated way. Azam, as you know, is a word which is also used in the Urdu language. In Arabic, it means a strong resolve. It means a very defined intention. So how can a person who is giving divorce in the state of jest or in a state of anger, unless of course this is a situation that he has this intention, how can we say that he's actually exercising this right to divorce in the way that the Quran is telling him? First, this is the first thing. And the second thing that needs to be understood is that the hadith itself, as I said, is something which it does not fall in the category of Sahih hadith. Sahih here is the technical word. So as I said that I have always wanted to ask our scholars that if this is the case, then why do actually they insist on something which is not only against the Quran, but in itself it's ill-founded? I think it would be better if you have this experience and if you could go and ask a scholar and ask a typical scholar in this case and seek this inquiry from him, that why at all is this hadith invoked when it is not in the first place it's not authentic, and in the second place it goes against the Quran.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. I have a question for Naz Saiba. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Right.
The mic is open for Naz Saiba. You can ask your question.
Yes, please proceed.
There must be some problem with mic.
Okay.
We can come back to that, or you can type it up, write it, and I'll ask on your behalf if that issue persists. I have a comment from Khalid Haksab. Excuse me. Khalid Haksabi says XQ28 gene has been clearly shown that homosexuality is genetic. That's his comment. I wanted to share it with you in the class.
Okay. So as I said, that if there is something which is of genetically compelled, so I gave this example of a kleptomaniac, of a person who has some obsession, and we would not actually like this obsession to go on in the society. So in a very similar way, even if it is genetically compelled, what we can best do is that we can that the Almighty might give him or her this concession when he or she is given has to be taken account for on the day of judgment. But other than that, we cannot condone it.
Saiba, are you able to ask your question this time? I don't think so. Dr. Saiba, I have two questions, and Rafia Khaja Saiba had some follow-ups, so I'll go back. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. I've understood about the gays, and as I said, it's a very sad thing. I'm feeling very sad presently, but as I said, I can't explain. I can just pray for her, and I just hope God will judge her properly. But I think that I can't condemn her, and you, I think, agree with me.
Right.
She's not at fault for what has happened to her.
Right. I mean, the way whether she's at fault or not is something not for us to decide. Let the Almighty decide. We don't know what situation she's passing through and the decision that she has taken. But outwardly, our own treatment of that individual should be of sympathy, of kindness, of any other person, the way you would treat any other person, with sympathy, with love, with affection, and let the orientation issue, the sexual orientation issue let it be between her and her God. And it could be a matter of disturbance for you, it could be a matter of alarm for you, but again, as I said, this is because you feel concern for that person, and that concern can only be expressed if the other person is willing to have your comments, and if she thinks that she would like your corrective procedure to take place. If that's not the case, then of course all of us do feel bad when we see some of our close ones doing something that we think is wrong. But remember, this is our feeling. She or the person who might be involved in these things, when they are doing these things, they don't think that they're doing something wrong. So it's like saying that when a person is smoking a cigarette, we feel very sorry for him because he is doing something which is very bad for his own health as well as for the family. But again, that if that person does not have this feeling, if that person is okay with doing something which is not only harmful for his own self but for the atmosphere and the surroundings as well, what else can we do but to accept whatever the other person has decided for his own self or her own self, and at the same time, if there is an opportunity, if there is a chance to discuss these things, let that chance come, and it's at that time that we should actually cogently and very sagaciously speak out in a very positive frame of mind.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. She said she's never been more happy than she is, so I've left it at that.
Right.
Thank you, Dr. Sahaba. Thank you, Dr. Sahaba. Class time is over. Inshallah, we'll meet next Saturday.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Khuda Hafiz.